This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. What I'm about to show you didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen loudly, and it didn't happen where you were told to look. Because when nations prepare for conflict, they don't start with soldiers. They start with paperwork, quiet numbers, slow instruments that almost no one watches. And right now, one of those instruments is moving in a way that should make you very uncomfortable. Not because it signals collapse today, but because it signals commitment, the kind you don't reverse without consequences. You've been trained to watch ships, speeches, elections. Those are visible. They are designed to be seen. What matters now is something heavier, slower, harder to undo. And once it moves far enough, it doesn't come back. If you're still here, stay with me. Because once you understand what is being unwound, you can't unsee where this goes next. And the next step is already underway. What actually controls this system now is not elections, not speeches, not even markets, in the way we used to mean that word. What controls it is who is forced to hold whose risk. For decades, the global order worked because buyers chose to participate. They bought because it made sense, because the return justified the exposure. That is no longer the case. Today, the most important flows are not voluntary. They are coerced. They move through allies, through intermediaries, through balance sheets that were never designed to carry this much strain. This is why focusing on personalities misses the point. The system no longer responds to persuasion. It responds to pressure. And pressure doesn't show up as panic. It shows up as absorption, quietly, reluctantly, until capacity runs out. That's the frame you need to hold. Because once buying becomes an obligation rather than a choice, the system stops behaving like a market. And when that shift happens, stability doesn't mean safety. It means postponement, which brings us to the change that was normalized so slowly, most people didn't notice it happening at all. There was a time when this system behaved differently, not because it was fair, but because it was predictable before money moved for return. Risk was priced, exposure was negotiated. Now, money moves for survival. The shift didn't arrive with an announcement. It arrived as a habit, then as an exception, then as policy. What used to be unthinkable became temporary. Temporary became necessary, and necessary became invisible. Debt stopped being a neutral instrument. It became leverage. Not leverage over markets, leverage over behavior. Holding another country's obligations was once a sign of trust. Then it became a sign of alignment. Now it's a test of loyalty. And the most dangerous part of that transformation is how calmly it was absorbed. No alarms, no headlines that stuck, just a steady rewriting of incentives until exit became more important than yield. Slow change is the hardest to fight because it doesn't feel like change at all. It feels like continuity, right up until it doesn't. And the moment that illusion cracked, the first shock didn't come from words. It came from numbers. The shock wasn't dramatic. It didn't come with sirens or speeches. It arrived buried in a document most people never read. A report so dull it usually puts markets to sleep. But inside it, something was wrong. A major holder was exiting fast. During the worst possible moment to sell, prices were already down. Anyone rational would have waited. Anyone managing for return would have slowed down. Instead, the selling accelerated. That's the tell. In finance, you don't lock in losses unless time itself has become the enemy, unless holding on is riskier than letting go, unless the asset you're selling is no longer just an asset. This wasn't rebalancing. It wasn't profit taking. It was abandonment. And the most unsettling part wasn't how much was sold. It was when, because selling into weakness doesn't protect value. It protects jurisdiction. If you're still watching, pause on that idea. Ask yourself why someone would accept a guaranteed loss today. To avoid an uncertain outcome tomorrow. Because once you understand that motivation, the next layer of this system becomes visible. And that's where things stop looking accidental. What makes this dangerous isn't the sale itself. It's what the sale forces other people to do. Because when a position that large moves, it doesn't disappear. It transfers. Every bond sold has to be bought by someone else. And when the original buyer is leaving for strategic reasons, the replacement buyer is not stepping in for profit. They're stepping in to prevent failure. This is where the system reveals how it actually works. The losses don't vanish. They are absorbed, distributed across balance sheets that never volunteered for the role. The damage doesn't hit the seller first. It hits the holders who remain. Some are visible. Some are hidden behind custodians and proxies. Some are masked by geography. But the pattern is unmistakable. As one exits, others are compelled to enter. Not because the trade is good, but because the alternative is worse. This is how stability is manufactured. Not through confidence, through obligation, and obligation has a ceiling. Because unlike surplus-driven buyers, political buyers have limits, domestic limits, currency limits, voter limits. The system is holding together, only as long as those limits are not breached. Which raises the question no one wants to answer yet. What happens when they are? The second shock comes faster, and it doesn't wait for permission. Because once replacement buyers step in, the system stops asking why and starts asking how long. Yields should be higher, much higher. Supply is rising. Demand is artificial. Risk is obvious. And yet, the market doesn't break. Not because it's healthy, but because it's being held. This is where people get confused. They see survival and mistake it for strength. But held systems don't heal. They accumulate stress. Every intervention flattens the signal. Every forced purchase delays the price. Every delay increases the eventual move. This is not equilibrium. It's suspension. And suspension is unstable because the buyers now propping this up are not immune to gravity. They have currencies. They have voters. They have their own debt clocks ticking. The moment one of them needs liquidity, not profit, not strategy, but cash, the logic reverses. The buyer becomes the seller. The support becomes pressure. And what looked like calm turns out to be compression. You don't hear that moment coming. You feel it. And by the time it shows up on a chart, it's already too late to step aside. Which brings this directly out of institutions and into something much closer to you. This is where it stops being abstract. Because the system doesn't absorb stress evenly. It routes it, and eventually it routes it to you. You don't experience this as a bond auction. You experience it as a rate you didn't expect. A payment that jumps, a loan that quietly disappears. You feel it when borrowing becomes conditional, when refinancing becomes impossible, when safe suddenly means short-term, temporary, revocable. You are not holding sovereign debt, but sovereign debt is holding you. It determines whether credit is cheap or scarce, whether banks lend or freeze, whether governments can cushion shocks or pass them through. And here's the part that matters. You are told this is normal, that volatility is cyclical, that stability has returned. If you believe that, you stop paying attention. If you stay with me, you start seeing the pattern because the pressure building here doesn't stop at borders. It doesn't respect flags, and it doesn't stay contained inside financial plumbing. It moves outward, and when it does, it doesn't ask who was watching. It asks who is exposed. What happens next doesn't stay domestic. It can't, because this system was never national. It was layered, interlocked, designed so stress could be shared. Now that sharing is turning into contagion. When one buyer steps in under pressure, another steps back under strain. Currencies start to speak before officials do. Trade flows adjust before policy admits it. Liquidity quietly chooses sides. What once looked like cooperation starts to resemble coordination under duress. You can see it in where assets are parked. You can see it in who is willing to absorb risk and who suddenly isn't. The center is being protected by thinning the edges, and edges fail first, because no system can indefinitely weaken its periphery to preserve its core without consequence. At some point, the cost of participation exceeds the cost of exit. And that's the moment everyone pretends isn't coming, because acknowledging it would mean admitting this isn't a temporary imbalance. It's a directional shift, one that doesn't reverse cleanly,